Well, thank you for attending District Training Conference today. My name is Mark Brackett from the Rotary Club of Chemainus. I'm the technical support for this session entitled A Premier Look at DEAI. And let me introduce your session leader, Carissa from the Rotary Club of Puyallup.
Welcome to A Premier Look at DEAI. As Mark was saying, this is a sensitive topic, and it's an important topic, especially for Rotary family members to start talking about. In a second, we're going to talk about what the A means in DEAI. We're going to get that at the very front. But before we do so, I just want to share with you all, this is a journey, right? And we're all on this spectrum of understanding. And even in our own journey, you know, we don't always get it right. But the whole, I guess the important part of it is that we're doing something. And so I would just ask that if you are on your journey to create a more inclusive and diverse club in your area, that you just give yourself grace. I have to learn to do that for myself. I don't always get it right. In fact, today, who knows, hopefully I'll get it right, but we shall see. So I just wanted to preface this with just make sure that you have a lot of grace for yourself because this is a hard journey to take, but an important one. So let's get started. The DEAI, it stands for Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, and Inclusion. So the A is fairly new. They added that, but they realized, and we'll dig in deeper what accessibility is, but they realized if people can't access or are not represented in a certain type of space or organization, that is a huge component to whether or not people feel like they want to be a part of something or not. For example, if you walked into a room, and maybe you have in your life, or maybe you haven't, if you are, let's say, white, the majority, and you walked into a room of a all Black room, or all Latino, or all, you know, Asian American room, and you were the minority, how would you feel? If you didn't have representation in that room, how would you feel? So when we have Rotary clubs that are majority white, and we have visitors that come in that don't see themselves represented, then how do you think that they feel? And so accessibility is extremely important. What do you hope to gain from the session? So if you could do me a favor, and just in the chat box, if you could just write down or type in a few things that you hope to gain from our session today. And I'm hoping that we can wrap up the PowerPoint stuff and start having some communication and just a conversation. So if you can put that in the chat box, just so we can try to, you know, help you with the reason that you were here in the first place. And some things to consider. What does DEAI mean for you and your clubs? Where does your club currently stand in respect with DEAI, and where is there room for growth? And again, we kind of talked about the spectrum. There's some clubs that are like, whoa, we're not even at the starting line to even be talking about these things, so we need to be. And some clubs that are like, man, we're very progressively forward. We figured some things out, and you know, we're moving things along. So where are you at in the spectrum? And in that, we all have room to grow. So where can we grow from there? Also, how can you take responsibility to move your club forward? So what are some of the things that you can do to move your club forward in the movement? So first we have to ask ourselves, why is DEAI important to Rotary? Well, something very important to Rotary is that clubs are reflective of the community that they serve. And I've heard several times where people have said, well, you know, our club is reflective. We don't know that there's anyone, you know, from the BIPOC. And let me tell you what BIPOC is. Black, Indigenous, sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So the BIPOC community, there's folks that say there is no one from that community that is locally in our area or able to join Rotary. And to that, I would challenge you that there are. again, they probably don't feel like Rotary is a safe place for them, because the thought process of Rotary, or the stigma that we have, is it's an older white gentleman's club. And so when people hear that from a BIPOC community, that automatically does not make them feel like it's a safe place. If your club is doing well, what do you think contributes to your club's success in DEAI? And if it's not doing well, what do you think is holding that up? Here are some learning objectives that we're going to go over today. So understanding terminology and definitions. We're also going to be talking about how do we build bridges and come together through conversation. And then again, how can you help lead a change? So you may not be the president, you may not be on the board, you may not be in a position of leadership in your Rotary Club or in your community, you may feel, but you have the ability to lead the change. We all have the ability to lead the change. It just takes self-determination, and it takes commitment. So we'll talk about that here in a second. So let's share what diversity means. So diversity means, or the definition is, all the ways that people are different and the same at the individual and group levels. Even when people appear the same, they're different. So I like to break this down. Diversity, yes, it's about race. Absolutely. But that's not all it's about. It's also about physical ability, sexual orientation, gender, ethnicity, age. Additionally, it's about income, appearances, experiences, parental status, marital status, hobbies, cultures, religions, and personality. So diversity makes up, it's basically how are we individual and different from and the same, right? How are we different and how are we the same? Next, we're going to talk about equity. So with equity, equity is the fair and just treatment of all members of the community, right? I know many of you have probably seen these depictions. You know, the first one, you have equality, everybody has a box, they can stand on, two of them can see, but the third one can't. But if we, you know, equity is giving those who need a little bit more or some adjustment, we give them that in order for them to feel like they can be a part of things. And so another way I like to explain this, I'm sure many of your clubs have ordered t-shirts for projects that you've done. And I always think it's funny because we always order men's large cotton Hanes beefy t-shirts, right? And so me being a pleasantly plump woman or a curvy woman, men's t-shirts don't look all that great on me. So I have to get the t-shirt and then I come home and I have to modify it. And so it's one more thing that I have to do in order to feel comfortable being a part of Rotary, when all the while we could have found a vendor that might have been a little bit more in cost, but would have made everybody feel comfortable. So equity is, how do we find ways to make people feel or have access to things that they need in a way that's meaningful. So accessibility is giving equitable access to everyone along the continuum of human ability and experience. Additionally, one of the things that we've looked at is it's not necessarily just about physical ability. While that is important, it's also about representation. So it could be the physical environment, but it can also be representation of different people in leadership leadership statuses in your club or other organizations. So if you think about your club with accessibility, how do you feel you rank? Inclusion is one of my favorite aspects of DEAI, and I'm going to share with you why in just a second. But inclusion refers to the intentionality, ongoing efforts to ensure that diverse individuals fully participate in all aspects of the organizational work. to include decision-making processes. The reason I love inclusion so much is because while a truly inclusive club is diverse, a diverse club is not necessarily inclusive. Let me share what that means. If I have a good set of diversity in our club, and I'm really proud about this, I still can be having a club that's not inclusive. So though I may have people there that can be representatives, I may not be doing things that pull them into the center of what we do, really maximizing our best efforts. So if we can change it to where our clubs are inclusive from the front, that will call in people from diversity, right? It'll call in people from all areas. So what do those practices look like? So I want to just try to illustrate what inclusion, how to explain it a little bit further. Including someone is like inviting them to a prom, right? To be inclusive would be to play their song, but to truly create inclusion is asking them to dance. So I just want to earmark this, especially with music. Don't ever assume that you know what their song is. Create relationships that proactively ask people what they'd like to hear, right? So instead of, assuming someone from a different culture is thinking one way and then just automatically doing it, even though we think we're being helpful, have the conversation, because we all know what assuming does. I don't have to say it, I'm sure. But assuming isn't the right way to do it. Have those proactive conversations and have them equally across the board with everyone. Make sure that you're finding out what people like and put it in the mix of all that you do. And Mark, as they're starting to choose some of these, what are one of the questions that we've had? And maybe we can start.
Some of the questions are, if you have, let's say, a less diverse room and you are working on it, but right now it's not, and then you have somebody walk in, is there any tips to creating that safer, inclusive space when the first person walks in, let's say?
Yes, and that's a great question, especially whenever we come to inclusion, right? So here is what I've heard, and I can't speak on behalf. First off, let me just start. I cannot speak on behalf of all white women, white people. I can't expect one person who is, one person can't speak on behalf of all people, right? So what I believe may be very different from what someone else believes. But to answer that question, if you can create a process where everyone who walks in the room receives the same treatment, and receives the same welcome and receives that care and embrace of being part of something, then you're going to be doing great. If you overdo it with some and then underdo it with others, those things are recognizable, right? So those things, people who experience that all the time out in the real world, there's sometimes where you can come across as unauthentic, and then other times where it's just not done. And so people sometimes are afraid of what they don't know, so they don't go and experience that connection. And then other people who overdo it, right? So it's it goes beyond being inclusive and then becomes overwhelming. So you just have to find that balance, and the best way to find that balance is just to practice it, and practice it in safe spaces with friends, and have conversations with friends on what that might look like. I was just having a conversation the other day with one of my friends, and he was sharing with me when he goes to restaurants, if he sees that restaurants, they're having fair and equal treatment to everyone else, but then they're short with him and angry with him, or if they overdo it with him, he can tell the difference. And so you have to find a way that it becomes authentic to you. I hope that answered the question, but if not, we can get into conversation later. Hopefully we have some time for that. So a few things that I just want folks to consider. One if, again, and we covered this a little bit, but if you were a minority and you walked into a room and it was an all white room, how would you feel if no one else looked like you? Would you feel like that's a safe place for you? So would everyone attending your club feel as though it's a safe environment for them? I'm going to share a little story with you. I have a friend who we went to a local, I live close to Olympia, Washington. We went to Olympia. Neither one of us go there very often. He's a Black gentleman, tall with dreads, and oftentimes, you know, people, they are not all that nice to him. Let's just put that out there. We walk into a bar in Olympia. We're just kind of hanging out, and there's no other Black people in there. And I felt him just tense. And he asked me, he was like, Krissa, do you mind if we just go someplace else? Because I don't quite feel comfortable here. And this was a couple of years ago, before I really had a little more awareness. And I just looked at him and I was like, okay. And I was a little confused. And we went into the next bar. It was like 3 doors down. And right at the bar, there were, a few Black people, Black guys, bigger, ordering drinks. And instantly his energy changed, and they made eye contact, and he felt comfortable and he felt safe. In the bar we were in prior to, he was feeling like, okay, why is there nobody who looks like me? I've never been here before, so I don't know how they're going to treat me. And if something goes wrong, do I have anyone who I know has my back? When we went to the next one, it was that instant, okay, I know this is a safe place for me. Me being a white person, I have not had to feel that very often in my life. This is an everyday walk for people of color. So I just want to put that out there just to create that awareness. And again, not all people of color have had that experience, but people of color, majority, have. Also, things to consider: the cost. So this is an interesting one. Not only cost financially, but for someone like me, who's a single mom taking care of 2 kids, the cost is very important to me financially, but also the cost emotionally. We need to consider what that emotional cost is for people who are marginalized, or people who are the minorities, right? So minorities that are coming into our clubs, what is that energy cost? So if there's little things happening, like little jokes or little side things, or things called microaggressions, which we'll talk about in a second, if those things are happening, that's an emotional toll. That's an emotional toll that people then say, this club and me serving in a volunteer role is not worth the cost of my energy on a weekly, daily basis. So other things to consider: what are your traditions? Are they inclusive? Are they open to different religions, cultures, genders, sexual orientations, abilities, basically your true reflection of your community? So how are those traditions that you have? For example, there's some cultures where clean eating is very important, kosher eating. So do you have one of those options or more on your menu? Is that intentional? So little things that you can do. And again, when you have representation in your club, you know what those things are because you have someone to talk to. If you don't have that representation yet, go look for it. And let me be clear, don't tokenize people. And we'll talk about that in a second too. But don't find someone just to get them in your club so that you can ask them all the questions. Like, do your research. There's Google, there's educational platforms that we'll talk about, but do your research in finding out some of these things. That learning and that education, that's on us. That's our responsibility to do that. That's not on the expectation of others to tell us. So real quick, we're going to take a break and kind of get to a couple questions or comments. Mark, are there any comments or questions?
There's quite a few in the chat. It's been great. One was increasing our conversation here. So we're not only talking about race and physical abilities, but we're talking about everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in a little bit, I'm going to show a wheel of power and privilege, and kind of shows part of that, but absolutely, we're talking about ageism, we're talking about abilities, we're talking about all of those things that you saw in that diversity slide. It's not just about race. Race is a big part of it, because that's one of the bigger struggles that some organizations have, is finding where that intersectionality and that building of bridges comes in. However, absolutely, diversity is like, if you have, you know, one category or group represented in your club, and you don't, it is, for example, if you have more females than you do males. So if it's, which I've not seen too many of, but if it's predominantly female, how can you make sure that you're intentional about creating that evenness, right? So yeah, it's not just about that. It's a large part. It holds a large part in this, but it is not all about that. You're correct. What other questions?
Quite a few about the $1 million question. How can we be more reflective of our communities, or how can we brainstorm about the opportunities? And all of that in the context of not being phony about it, but being actually making progress.
Yeah, great. Well, it takes us right into this next portion. It starts with a conversation, right? So we talked a little bit about the power and privilege wheel. And as I share this story, I just want you to look at this grid and find out and be honest with yourself. Where do you lie on this, right? So I'm going to share a story with you. I have a friend who's my age. I'm 42, and she just had a stroke last year. Well, we celebrated her stroke anniversary, and I took her on a drive, and currently she has paralysis on the right hand side of her body, and she has some speech difficulties. And in our drive, we covered all kinds of things. So some of the things that she shared with me is she's had to learn after her stroke to just have grace and patience with people because they're uneducated. And that shook me a little bit, because I was like, you just went through one of the most traumatic things in your life by having a stroke. You're an independent woman that's now made independence much more difficult. And you have to have grace for other people. You have to have patience for other people. Like, what do you mean by that? And so she kind of shared with me, you know, people just don't have grace with, if she's at the grocery store, you know, people just kind of run over her, or they'll say, excuse me, and then they just keep going, not realizing that she has to try to keep her balance. The people who come through and do the Instacarts, right, where they come and, you know, fill orders, they just put the carts right in front of her, and so she's got to wait. So I'm hearing all these things, and I'm just like, are you kidding me? And we end up going to this restaurant. When we went to this restaurant, the this disabled access is a big long ramp, right, for wheelchairs. Well, when you have a stroke, if you're able to use a cane, they try to encourage you to be as mobile as possible to practice those skills. So she has a cane and she can barely walk, and we had to walk up this long ramp because she couldn't walk up these 3 stairs that could have probably been turned into a ramp, right? So we're walking up this very long ramp, and we finally get to the check-in, and they said, oh, it's going to be 20 to 35 minutes wait. So I said, okay, well, is there a chair she can sit on? And they said, well, due to COVID, we can't, you know, we don't have any waiting areas, but you can wait outside. And I'm like, well, the problem is she can't walk down those stairs, and that access is way too long for her. And I said, so there's not just a chair that maybe we could get. So they were a little bit frustrated. They went and talked to the manager. The manager said, well, let's just find a seat right away. They were going to sit us in the back of the restaurant because that server had an open seat, whereas there was also one in this other server. So I asked him, I said, can we be in this one closer to the front of the restaurant? And just the whole entire experience was just, we were coming up against obstacles, right? Well, in short, what I realized is my friend Lori, who once was a very independent woman, has zero ability to have access to this restaurant in her independence. So she would need someone at every turning point in order to operate in her normal, what she considers normal life. And she's the one who's supposed to have grace and patience for others. So I just challenge us that as we're looking at this wheel, if we fall more towards the center of that power and privilege center, how are we being intentional about ensuring that we're the example of grace and patience for others, and that we are finding out what that looks like and we do the work, right? And so here's some exercises that we can do. When we're in conversations, here's a few conversational tips. If you're in the center of that, come to the conversations ready to listen and learn. So don't come in it trying to explain why you are the way that you are or why you think the way that you do. Come to listen and learn. Also, if you find yourself hearing something and you feel triggered about it, instead of trying to defend that or to argue it, back up and try to listen and have the conversation. Ask questions to try to understand. So there have been times where I've heard terms that even have made me triggered at one point. And whenever I've been triggered about them and I'm like, oh, that really upsets me, and I'll throw one out, the word white privilege, that used to trigger me because I'm like, I wasn't given things. I wasn't just, given life on a silver, on a silver spoon. However, when I looked up and realized what that word really meant, I was like, yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. So when you understand the definitions and you understand it on a deeper level, it no longer triggers you. So instead of trying to come at it triggered and angry and argumentative, slow down and ask questions. Seek to understand first and then seek to be understood. That is a very important first step, second step. Seek to understand other people's position and then seek to be understood. Please do not doubt someone's experience. The fact that they're telling you this experience is already traumatizing enough. When they have to speak about a situation that hurt them or that was actively intentionally made to hurt them, that's traumatic. And every time they have to tell that story to help someone else understand their scope and their lens, that's a traumatic time for them. So don't end that with, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. Are you serious? That really happened? Don't end it with that. I know that it would feel uncomfortable to hear some of those stories. Here's a great way to respond to that. Man, you deserve better treatment than that. How can I help serve alongside you? How can I help raise awareness? That's a great way to respond to that. If someone corrects you in a situation, so if somebody comes at you and says, hey, whenever you say that, this is how it makes me feel, instead of being defensive, treat that as an investment in you, right? They invested that energy and that time in you to help you become a better person through their lens. That's an investment, right? So if a lot of times I have friends who they'll see things going on, they see microaggressions, they see straight out racism or sexism or hatred towards them. And instead of correcting or saying anything, they roll their eyes and they're like, they're not even worth my time. So if somebody thinks that you are worth their time, I know it's hard to hear. I know it's hard to look at yourself in the mirror and think that you need to change something about yourself, but I promise you, it's an investment worth having. If you come from the outer circle, if you come from that marginalized area, here's some things to consider when having those conversation tips. Make sure your energy is not at risk. So if somebody is coming at the conversation and they're trying to prove why the way that they think is right, and that's all they're coming to the conversation with, protect your energy. Also, it's not your responsibility to ensure growth in others. It's the other person's job, and they need to be intentional about it. And if you're willing to help them, that's a gift. So my friend Lori, who had to have, and she's the one who had a stroke, she's had to learn to have grace and patience. So with her, it's not her job to train people on how to treat her and how to be kind to her. It's a gift if she does. It's a gift if she speaks out. She's already going through a lot. It's our responsibility as society to take our lenses off and put on different lenses so that we can understand better. Remember, there's a difference between ignorance and then willfully ignorant. And I'm just going to leave that one there. Make sure to have a strong support and network. That's so important. Even through my journey in this, I found times where I felt so defeated. I felt just exhausted and drained. And the difference is I have the ability to switch that on or off. There's people who live in the marginalized area that don't get to turn it off. And so if you feel like, you know, your bucket's empty, make sure you have a network and a community that can help fill that bucket up. This is long, tiring work. If you are taking time to correct someone's behavior, I want to personally thank you, because that's a gift and an investment in them. And then they're going to have to choose how they take that investment and what they do with that investment. But that is a great investment into someone else. So let's flip into how you can help lead change. So number one, when I first got into my journey, I, was like, man, how can I make a difference, right? How can I help the world see through other people's lenses and make it a practice? And first, you have to educate yourself. So always come to everything with a learner's posture. There's no finish line. We're never done learning. So always come with a learner's posture. Build up your resource bank and have them on hand so that when you're helping other people through the journey, you can utilize them to teach. So just like I'm talking on this topic today, I have a bank of resources that I'm going to share with you in a minute. I have a bank of resources to help you along your journey. And they're just ones that were my favorite, but you'll find your favorites and ones that are impactful for you too. And as you start digging in, your bank becomes robust, and then you can share again with others. Connect with others who are on this journey with you. Again, you'll need support. And what I mean by that is I have friends in all the different communities, right? So I have some in the Black community, some in the Latino, some in, Muslim, some in the abled body and, who have disabilities. I have, I've been intentional about growing my friend group for years. My whole entire life, I always sought people who were different from me because I wanted to learn from them. Through that, it's difficult. Don't always tap on their shoulders to learn. Try to do some of the groundwork and then go to them and say, here's some of the things I've uncovered. Can you help me further my education on that? Don't come to them to fix that problem in you. Fix that problem and ask them to expand on it. I hope that makes sense. Be intentional with your growth and don't stop. Give yourself grace through the process. There's a few of you who are on this call today or on the Zoom who know me and know my process and know that, man, I am beating myself up at every turning point through this process, because there's times where I do things or I give a presentation and I'm like, oh my gosh, I did it there. Why did I do that? And I wasn't intentional. I didn't think about that. But that's how this journey goes. We learn, and as we fall, we realize, we get up, we do it differently. We are constantly learning. I'm sure in this presentation, there's going to be reflection that I do that I'm like, why did I say that? What was I thinking? But through that reflection is growth. So have grace on yourself, go through the growing pains, but have grace for yourself. But if you start whenever you feel like you're going to be perfect, you are never going to start. So it starts somewhere, right? Also, get in the right headspace. So I think it's really important. This is a marathon with no end in sight. This is a very long road ahead to where there's some major changes that need to happen in our society that we probably will never live to see. But it's about us planting and sowing and growing those seeds and making sure that for futures to come, it will be better than where we are today. It's about constant growth and movement forward. And again, please don't tap on those who are marginalized to teach you. I can't express that enough. There are tons of resources out there, and again, I'll show some. But just, you need to find a way where folks trust that you are willing to grow in the process. And if you're willing to grow in the process, oftentimes they'll come in and help support you. But if they feel like they're doing all the work, they already have so much on their plate. There's so many other things that we don't even know that they're filtering through on a daily basis. And as you educate yourself, you learn what some of those filters are and you understand them a little bit deeper. But we have to be careful not to tokenize people. So whenever we have, you know, 2 people of color in our club and we ask them, can you lead this task force? Can you lead the charges on this? They're there to support. We need to also help lead this. We also need to do the hard, dirty work, right? This is a problem within society that we have to help change, right? So how do we help society learn that we need to just see the world through other people's lenses? And that's really all this is how do I take my lenses of what I know and just put someone else's on? And as uncomfortable as that is, that's an important part of this process. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about my journey and things that have happened in my lived experience, and why, whenever we talk about the 4-way test, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwills and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? And additionally, when we as Rotarians are not holding up these values, saying something with love and respect. So you don't always have to call people out, rather call them into the conversation. So if somebody is saying something in your club, and I can guarantee that these things happen in every single club. There's maybe some sidebar conversations, some jokes, some little things that happen that might offend someone else. And maybe they haven't said anything because they don't want to create conflict, but we know in our heart that it's wrong. We need to go to those people and maybe not call them out in front of everyone, but maybe have a conversation with them on a side and say, hey, can I just call you in? And it's because I love you and respect you. I just want to help you understand this, that this is not okay. And when you do this, this is how it makes people feel. And take them through the process. And if they get angry and they say, well, Rotary is not the club for me anymore, I guess I'm just not having any fun, or I don't feel comfortable. Well, I challenge you to say, you're making other people feel uncomfortable. So whose comfort takes priority? They both should be important. Both people's comfort should be important. So your comfort doesn't overcome somebody else's, and someone else's doesn't overcome yours. That's not okay behavior. So let's just call each other in.
Carissa, there's been a few questions in the chat about jokes, and perhaps the point you were just making, you could relate to the off-color jokes that happen.
Yeah, it happens. I've seen it happen quite a bit. In fact, we have a gay man who is in our club, and when he first joined, that was kind of a shock for our club, because we have not necessarily had an openly gay man in our club before. Well, there was a situation where there were people, a gentleman who was telling a joke, and it was a gay joke, and the gentlemen who were sitting next to him were kind of chuckling, and then all of a sudden realized, oh my goodness, we have someone here, and I hope they didn't hear. And then they're all worried about that. And I will tell you, when something like that happens, doing the right thing when nobody else is watching, having integrity, that is so important. So whether or not someone's there to hear this or not, we need to stop laughing uncomfortably at people's jokes. Those kind of things, whenever people tell those kind of jokes, people might chuckle, but a lot of times they do it in discomfort because they're like, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to call that person out on that joke? There's very respectful ways that you can go about just saying, hey, I love you as a person, and I know you're trying to be funny. I need you to know that's not funny to me. And it makes me feel uncomfortable when you say that. And I'm going to ask you while you're around me. and even challenge you as a Rotarian. It's probably not fair to all concerned when you do that. It's probably not building goodwill and better friendships when you say those kind of things. So because I love you and care about you, I'm going to ask you, please don't say those things around me. And I would encourage and challenge you, just stop saying those things in general, right? So that's how you can challenge that in a loving way. And then they will do with that information as they will, right? That there's nothing you can do to control whether or not they stop. And that goes back to those who are ignorant have ignorance, and those who stay willfully ignorant. So I might tell a joke because I didn't understand that it upset somebody. Now that I know, man, I'm not going to say that anymore. And then those who choose to stay in that and continue that on. So I hope that explains a little bit. I think we need to also consider what others might be thinking, right? So even if it's someone who maybe they're not outwardly gay, maybe they haven't announced that they are, and that's a very private thing to them, and they hear something like this, how might someone feel, right? How might someone who's trying to go through the process and learn better feel, right? So for me, I find myself getting very frustrated with those things because it's just not okay. And people will say, oh, I have to be so politically correct now. No, you don't. We're asking you not to be rude. We're asking you not to be kind to others. That's all we're asking you to do. Just be kind to others. And if it hurts someone's feelings or hurts someone, just being aware of that and say, wow, do I want to be a person who helps lift others and puts into their life, or do I want to be a dark place in their life, right? So this kind of gets into our when silence in Rotary hurts and is dangerous. So when we don't say something, and I'm going to share with you, this is where I'm going to share a couple of my experiences from my lived experience that have kind of thrown me back a little bit. So excuse me, friend, your microaggression is showing, and this is subtle acts of exclusion. It's often unintentional, but it still hurts. So I've been a president-elect trainer for many years, right? And every year, whenever I go to register, I'll go to sign in, and automatically, through no horrible intentions of the person who's registering me in, but every time a comment will come across and say, oh, are you checking in for your husband? Assuming that because I'm there to train, I should be a man. That's what I hear. They're not meaning that. It's just something that's embedded in us. But that's a subtle act of exclusion. That's a little microaggression. So there's other microaggressions that happen out there with other minority groups or other marginalized people that happen quite a bit. And so it's us checking ourselves, right? So seeing somebody who, is maybe Asian American and going up to them, oh, what country are you from? Well, I'm from America. I was born in California. Oh, well, you speak such good English. Well, yeah, I was born here. So us assuming that someone is something that they're not, and vice versa. So those are microaggressions. And it's a habit that we have. Try to get away from those, even with people who are heavier. I happen to be, like I said, fluffy. I'm a curvy woman. And I don't know how many times I've gone out to eat and someone has come up to me and said, instead of, can I get you something to drink? I've been asked, would you like a Diet Coke? And I'm like, no, I don't want a Diet Coke. I want a water, but thank you that I need to be on a diet. So it's like these little things that are unintentional, but like good intentions can be hurtful still. So we just need to be paying attention to that. When we talk about women being voted in 1987, I've seen so many times where guys, you have good intentions. Again, I get it, but they get up and they're like, women were voted in 1987. And when that ballot came over, I checked yes. And I'm so proud of that decision. And for women, hearing that over and over and over, what it says to us is you at one point had the decision and the power to allow me in this club. My ability to be in this club one day was in your hands. And are you saying it because you want me to be happy that you did that? Like, am I supposed to congratulate you after? I don't understand why I have to hear that all the time. However, I get the intention. The intentions are good. You're trying to show it was important for me to have you here. And I get that. But when we hear it constantly, that's then where we go to it. And whenever it's coupled with other sexist things, it gets frustrating, right? Whenever it's coupled with, oh, are you checking in for your husband? Or, and I'll tell you another story, when it's coupled with all of those things, it just becomes frustrating and it becomes too much. So perhaps a better way to say this is, man, in 87, Rotary made the best decision that they could have, letting women in. And man, what a glorious day it is. We are better because we have more representation of so much. That's a great way to celebrate that. And I'm not trying to pick on you guys. It's not, I'm really not. I'm trying to help you. um, Also, whenever you hear, oh, that didn't really happen, did it? Stop doubting someone's experience. I had a situation where being president of my Rotary Club, you automatically have a seat on the foundation board. So the foundation board is all men, and the first meeting I went to, I go into our foundation meeting, and it's at somebody's house, and they're all in the kitchen chatting and talking about classic cars. And I was never really invited into the conversation, though my dad is a collector. And that didn't really bother me. I just stood and waited for the meeting to happen. We go into the living room, and the president grabs a notepad and pen and hands me the notepad, and he goes, here you go. And I said, oh, that's okay. I don't need a notepad and pen. And he goes, no, you do. You're taking notes. And I said, well, you have a secretary that takes notes. So no, I don't need that. And he pushes it towards me and he goes, no, you're taking notes. And I looked around the room, and every guy's face was just like, and like frozen. And I looked at him in his eyes, and I pushed it back, and I said, I will not be taking notes, but thank you. And I just sat there, and the whole meeting, I was fuming because I'm like, how dare you? Right? Like, what? So I could not even tell you what was happening in that meeting at all. I was holding back my rage. I was holding back my tears. I get up when the meeting's done, I leave. And as I leave, one of them, one of the guys runs out and he's like, oh my gosh, Chris, I am so sorry that happened. That was horrible. That was so wrong. And I said, I appreciate you acknowledging that, but I have to ask you, how would it feel if your wife or your daughter were in that meeting? How would you have wanted any one man to just stand up for them? Just one of you stand up. I said, you left me on my own having to deal with that. And that's not okay. So when silence hurts in Rotary are those moments when something's wrong, it's wrong, and you don't say anything because you're afraid of the discomfort. Well, listen, you didn't create that discomfort. The person who's being attacked in a way didn't create the discomfort. The person who said it created that discomfort. So it's important that we have those conversations, and whether we do it in a group or we do it separately, it's important that we have those conversations. No amount of money is worth devaluing. So after I had said what I had said, how would your wife or daughter feel? The reaction I got after that was, man, this person just has deep pockets and they donate a lot to club. And I told the person who I was talking to, I said, right there is another reason that I'm still angry, because you value the money that he donates over the value of who I am. And I said, I know it's unintentional. This is just what you're running to explain why you didn't say anything, but this is how that makes me feel. And so it's very important to have conversations and do it with love, right? Do it with love. I stayed in club. I was able to have that conversation. We were all able to talk about it and grow from it. But that was a defining moment in our club where I could have easily said, Rotary is not worth the cost of my energy. Right? So how many people have done that, right? If we have people who have left our club and we wonder why, they probably are just saying, well, it's the time commitment or other things. What's the real reason that they're not telling you, perhaps? So the other thing that's really hard is they won't be around forever. I don't know how many times I've heard from people who are like, oh, that person's older and they're not going to be around forever. That's dangerous, because the people who are allowed to do these things and who are saying these things, they're setting structure and example for what others see is okay to do. So whenever we just allow that because they're older, they're set in their ways, not in Rotary. Not in Rotary. It doesn't fall under the four-way test. What is now the five-way test for me? It doesn't fall under that four-way test. So please get away from that and take that person to coffee, take that older person to coffee and just say, because I love you, because you're my Rotary brother or sister, I just want to share this with you. And then again, allow them to do what they're going to do with it. And they're either going to help grow themselves or they're going to weed themselves out. So I want to share this quick video with you. And then we'll be wrapping up to go into our conversation.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in a 1968 speech where he reflects upon the civil rights movement, states, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." As a teacher, I've internalized this message. Every day all around us, we see the consequences of silence manifest themselves in the form of discrimination, violence, genocide, and war. In the classroom, I challenge my students to explore the silences in their own lives through poetry. We work together to fill those spaces, to recognize them, to name them, to understand that they don't have to be sources of shame. In an effort to create a culture within my classroom where students feel safe sharing the intimacies of their own silences, I have 4 core principles posted on the board that sits in the front of my class, which every student signs at the beginning of the year. Read critically, write consciously, speak clearly, tell your truth. I find myself thinking a lot about that last point, tell your truth. And I realized that if I was going to ask my students to speak up, I was going to have to tell my truth and be honest with them about the times where I failed to do so. So I'd tell them that growing up, as a kid in a Catholic family in New Orleans, during Lent, I was always taught that the most meaningful thing one could do was to give something up, sacrifice something you typically indulge in to prove to God you understand his sanctity. I've given up soda, McDonald's, French fries, French kisses, and everything in between. But one year, I gave up speaking. Figured the most valuable thing I could sacrifice was my own voice, but it was like I hadn't realized that I had given that up a long time ago. I had spent so much of my life telling people the things they wanted to hear instead of the things they needed to. Told myself I wasn't meant to be anyone's conscience because I still had to figure out being my own, so sometimes I just wouldn't say anything, appeasing ignorance with my silence, unaware that validation doesn't need words to endorse its existence. When Christian was beat up for being gay, I put my hands in my pocket and walked with my head down as if I didn't even notice. Couldn't use my locker for weeks because the bolt on the lock reminded me of the one I had put on my lips when the homeless man on the corner looked at me with eyes up, merely searching for an affirmation that he was worth seeing. I was more concerned with touching the screen of my Apple than actually feeding him one. When the woman at the fundraising gala said, "I'm so proud of you. It must be so hard teaching those poor, unintelligent kids," I bit my lip because apparently we needed her money more than my students needed their dignity. We spend so much time listening to the things people are saying that we rarely pay attention to the things they don't. Silence is the residue of fear. It is feeling your flaws gut-wrench guillotine your tongue. It is the air retreating from your chest because it doesn't feel safe in your lungs. Silence is Rwandan genocide. Silence is Katrina. It is what you hear when there aren't enough body bags left. It is the sound after the noose is already tied. It is charring. It is chains. It is privilege. It is pain. There is no time to pick your battles when your battles have already picked you. I will not let silence wrap itself around my indecision. I will tell Christian that he is a lion, a sanctuary of bravery and brilliance. I will ask that homeless man what his name is and how his day was, because sometimes all people want to be is human. I will tell that woman that my students can talk about transcendentalism like their last name was Thoreau, and just because you watch one episode of The Wire doesn't mean you know anything about my kids. So this year, instead of giving something up, I will live every day as if there were a microphone tucked under my tongue, a stage on the underside of my inhibition. Because who has to have a soapbox when all you've ever needed is your voice? Thank you.
I love that video. It makes me teary-eyed. I hope I didn't mess up my makeup. So there's so many great TED Talks. There's so many great YouTube videos. There's so many great resources out there. And I just want to share a couple of my favorites that have really helped me in my process. Podcasts. There's one called Seeing White from Seen on Radio. Amazing, amazing podcast. They also do one called Men that really help you understand the history of some of the structures that our country has. And country, I'm sorry, I know I also have folks from Canada. So this is kind of a podcast that's based out of the United States, but it's still worthwhile the listen, because it's not all about just what our specific country has done, but it also kind of explains a little bit further how some of these things came about, some of these divisions with race, with men and women, so on and so forth. There's also, it's just a great podcast. I would highly recommend it. There's one called Code Switching, which is really great, and several others. Movies that have been really great and really eye-opening is 13th, When They See Us, Let It Fall, I'm Not Your Negro, also Emmett Till, Selma, and Amend. Amend is a great series that talks about the 14th Amendment. And so it really kind of goes into how the 14th Amendment was created, and then how it's gone through its structuring and how it's relevant today. Some books, The Color of Law is awesome, The New Jim Crow, White Fragility, and then also How to Be an Anti-Racist. Some support groups. So the Pierce County Community Engagement Task Force, this is like my home. This is a group of people that, and this is available to anyone all around the world. This is a group of people who it's diversified, it's intentional about its inclusion, and we create programs and processes in order for organizations to be clear on DEAI. So it's a great resource, it's a free resource. If you are very intentional about wanting your organization to go further, my mentor, Lawrence Garrett, he runs 828 Consulting Agency, and he is phenomenal. He is a practitioner at DEAI. And even though he's a practitioner, he will tell you there's times he makes mistakes. So I want you all to just reiterate, have grace with yourself. You're going to stumble along this process. And then also there's websites available. And Google's your friend. Google is your friend. I'm happy to answer any questions if you want to reach out to me. If there's anything else that I can assist you with, I'm happy to do so. With that, let's have a conversation. This matter is a healing of hearts to rebuild trust. So that's what we're trying to do today. And then open to any questions.
We had one earlier in the chat, and you touched on it there, but there's someone in a Rotary club who always refers to the women in the club by Miss followed by their first name, and never refers to any of the men by Mr. and their first name.
Yeah, that sounds like that's a really great opportunity for a courageous conversation. I like to call them courageous conversations because they are really difficult. Like having conversations to help correct and not even correct, to help provide insight to other people, that's difficult because the society that we live in, it's easier to take the path of least resistance than to go on the path of resistance. But I promise you, if you take the path of resistance a little bit with love and grace, I promise you, as you start practicing it, it becomes easier and easier. And now I really enjoy finding opportunities to be able to do this, right? I enjoy finding opportunities to have conversations with people, because the transition and the transformation that happens in their life, it's such a beautiful thing. And for me to know that I had a little part in changing their world, and now they're going to change the world for other people, it's amazing. So I would absolutely encourage that. Other questions?
Anyone is welcome to raise their hand now. I see Julie's waving her hand there.
Hi. Hi, Carissa.
Hi.
Girl. Julie from Parkland Spanaway Rotary Club.
Yes.
Hey, would you be willing to come speak to our club about this? We have a need.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Thank
Just
you.
reach out to me and we'll schedule it.
I will. I'm sorry that I don't have any questions, but I took like 14 pages of notes. It was all good. I
Good.
just would like you to, how about if you explain the definition? When I first started learning about all of this, I didn't know what this meant, and that maybe some of us here don't. Implicit bias.
Yeah, so implicit bias is very interesting. And there's lots of different, let's see here. I'm actually going to Google the actual definition, because there's a lot of different takes that you can go off of that. But I want to show you all real quick how easy it is just to go in, like whenever you're hearing these terms, right? Whenever you hear things like white privilege, or you hear things like defunding the police, or you hear things like implicit bias, or you hear things like microaggression, how easy. We all have this little computer in our hands that you can go on Google and you can learn what it really means, instead of assuming what it might mean in order to get angry about, right? So let's go implicit bias, and I'll tell you exactly what.
Good advice.
Yes.
Good advice. I'm gonna Google microaggression because I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah. So in here, a lot. So the second I put this in, there's tons of different resources to come up, right? So it gives an example. So it says, what is an example of implicit bias? An implicit bias may run counter to a person's conscious beliefs without them realizing it. For example, it is possible to express explicit liking of certain social groups or approval of certain actions while simultaneously being biased against the group or action unconsciously. So implicit bias would be, for example, when I went to President-elect training, and I checked in and they said, oh, are you checking in for your husband? It was unintentional, but that's implicit bias. I have a set of understanding that men are going to be coming in to train. So that's just put in me. So it was implicit bias. I didn't mean to offend you. The Diet Coke thing, I didn't mean for it to come across as that, but that's how it came across. Thank you for asking. But yes,
Thank you.
I really want to help everybody understand the power and beauty of this little contraption in our hand, because it's helped me through so many things.
It's not as easy for everybody, you know.
No, you're right. It's not. It is not. But if you sit down with a 13 or 14-year-old, they taught me everything I know on this phone. I go and I hand in my phone and I go, I don't know what I did. Can you fix it?
We have 2 minutes left. If there's another question out there, another story, another comment.
So if not, I will wrap it up with something that I would like to challenge all of you with. Whenever we look at a world that's supposed to be set up for all of us, what I would challenge you to do is go into your grocery stores or your Walgreens and see if it is set up for us. And what I mean by that, whenever you go to the Band-Aid aisle and you look at a Band-Aid and it says skin color, look and see what skin color that is on. That's typically a beige skin color. The clear ones which would be actual skin color, are not skin color. It's the beige ones. When you look at the lotion aisles, whenever you look at the shampoo aisles, what is available? What shampoos are available, right? So typically it is for a specific group. And so I would just challenge you that as you go about your day to day, look for things that maybe you didn't realize before, maybe you didn't see before, and just be mindful of recognizing, realizing, and then figuring out, how do we fix this? How do we just have a conversation about this? So I love it. The smartphone bias. Yes, I am showing the smartphone bias. Absolutely. Are there any other questions before we wrap up? Well, I want to thank all of you for allowing me to be a part of your morning and to kick your day off. I hope the gray boxes weren't too distracting. And I thank you for being willing to start taking this journey. So bless all of you. And if you need anything, I'm available and willing.